so maybe at the end. Yeah. Okay, so testing now that the sound is okay. Yeah. This is a silent event, so I will encourage everyone to put your headsets on. I am holding the headsets up. If you put it on, you can hear me. Can I have a thumbs up from the back? Can you hear me? Yes. Wonderful. Great. So if you are at the right event where you want to be, please put your headphones on. And for people online, I wish to welcome you to this event to debate new structures for adaptation. You have to put your headphones on. You see right next to you, there is a headphone. Yeah. Okay. Welcome to this event at the Resilience Hub. The event is called New Structures for Adaptation and Resilience Finance. What are the new financing structures needed to meet today's climate financing challenges and opportunities? No further ado, other than to quickly introduce myself. My name is Ingvild Solvang. I am Director of Climate Action and Inclusive Development at the Global Green Growth Institute. I'll be your host through the session today, the moderator. And before we get into things, I would like to welcome Helena MacLeod to the stage for a welcoming remark. She is the Acting Director General of the DGGI.
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay? This is the first time I've done a silent event. So this is a really important week. Every time we get together, it is a critical time in the world's history, and no more so for adaptation. So in terms of the world, 87% of climate finance goes to just a few parts of the world, to North America, to West Europe, and to East Asia. That means that only 13% of total climate finance goes to emerging markets, developing countries, and of course least developed countries. And of that, a fraction, relatively speaking, goes to adaptation. So this week, because of the financing focus of this COP29, adaptation, we hope, will be at the heart of a commitment agreement that will really make a difference. It's wonderful to be with the colleagues who are speaking today, great experts and leaders in the organizations committed to adaptation, and partners that we're working together with as GGGI. So in GGGI, we're young, we're pretty innovative, I think, and we're very nimble. We're only 12 years old, and we have 50 operations across the world. And what we really try and do is construct things that make an absolute difference on the ground. And we've done that in a number of areas. Just a few weeks ago, we set up something called a carbon transaction facility, where we already have 5 of our donor countries who've put money in for countries to get ready on Article 6, but not just to get ready, to actually start trading. And we'd love to see something happening on the adaptation side, because there is money, but it's not getting down to the countries. And it's not being used in a way that really mobilizes finance at scale. So I'm hoping that this convening today will be part of the discussion, part of thinking out of the box, but then trying to bring something down into a credible and concrete way forward. So welcome, lovely to have you all with us, and I hope we'll get time for questions from the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Now I would also wish to welcome Dr. Kyungnam Shin, the Assistant Director General of DGGI.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Helena has a very good speech regarding generic strategy, our visions. Okay. I'm a financing guy, so I must focus on climate finance. I found that there are so many brilliant speakers and panelists. I must say that I can explain very briefly about what we are doing here within 3 minutes or 4 minutes. My division is in charge of policy regulatory framework, and then different sector thematic areas, 7 sector and thematic areas, including energy, transport, and then resilience plus also financing. trust fund is also under my division. Last year, we achieved a $2 billion project development with financing match. And then it's comprising green bonds, we call sustainable finance, and then also infrastructure finance. Infrastructure finance, important like a project such as floating solar PV project, and then transport and other energy project. I must say that this is like a brilliant occasion to discuss with all these panelists and then audiences. As like Prana mentioned, we are very much like only 12 years old, but very nimble like institute. But we have a lot of like vision and strategy, and plus also expert group. More than 800 people working with 70 countries. 50 member country, just like 50 member country a couple of days ago, is growing up more than 30% earmark resources. So this occasion, I'm very happy to further elaborate our potential opportunity to work with you, directly contact you if a chance is given to us. This adaptation like issues, adaptation NAP process, we have already started working with 14 different countries. NDC also approach, we already started with like 10 countries with a focus on adaptation. I must say this is like another like opportunities to work with you, especially when I take a look at adaptation gap report, which was released just before COP, highlight international public adaptation finance flows to developing countries has increased from $22 billion to $28 billion in 2022. So it must be the huge opportunity we can tap together and show the real project development with the financing match. We want to reach out the final finishing line. So in build will frame some nice like adaptation planning challenge opportunities. But why we bring these figures to the fore, frequently there's still limited consensus around what is needed to address this gap. So please stay with us, and then we are looking for very productive and then valuable like opportunity for discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming this occasion. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's get started by thanking our partners of this event, the Adaptation Fund, the Columbia Climate School, and the Global Resilience Partnership, who is hosting us here on their pavilion. Now this has been a bit of a process and a dialogue that has lasted through several months, quite focused discussions. At the New York Climate Week, we came together in a panel discussion to discuss solutions for bridging finance. We also talked about more project-related design elements of what constitutes a good adaptation project. We also met at the Global Green Growth Week in October, which is GGGI's flagship knowledge week, to discuss establishing enabling environments for adaptation finance. So what we hope today is that we leverage those conversations that we have had again and again to get to the next level of identifying what the solutions might be. So some of the challenges that we have found is that private banks and private investors are saying it is too risky to invest in adaptation projects. And investors are saying adaptation plans do not provide an understanding of or means for or means for underwriting of climate risks. The international finance institutions are saying we have the financing, but the projects are not well designed and are not based on a shared common understanding and shared climate data. The governments are asking for legal frameworks that makes it easy to invest in insurance and other adaptation products. And the climate funds are asking questions around whether readiness processes are having the most effective outcomes. Are countries ready to access climate finance? We have also identified in our conversations that there is a bit of a conundrum and a fault line in the adaptation itself between the need for things to be locally led and driven by local stakeholders and local planning processes, while we also see that at the global level, we need to come to a more standardized set of data and a more unifying definition of what constitutes good and solid adaptation projects. So these are the challenges that we have identified. So again, today I hope with the help of the speakers that we will have in a minute, that we can come to try to solve those types of issues by looking at what type of adaptation governance frameworks do we need. I also would like to just, as part of the scene setting for the conversation, point to the global NAP review that GDDI has carried out with support of a consortium of partners, which was a review process of the NAPs submitted to the UNFCCC, looking at various elements of the NAPs to identify what constitutes a good quality national adaptation plan. And it isn't a big surprise that the weakest element of the NAPs that we found are the finance elements of the NAPs. And we found that a very few number of NAPs are detailing the cost of inaction of adaptation actions. The other issue that we have looked at is that 60% of NAPs are detailing the total cost of adaptation actions. We believe if they did that, the quality of the NAP would go up. Only 30% of NAPs discuss potential innovative financing mechanism as ways to finance the NAP. So those are kind of the areas, and that also gives you an idea of what we consider to be quality in terms of financial planning integrated into the NAP process itself. So let's use that a bit as the background for the conversation. And with that, I am very, very pleased to welcome a very, very excellent set of panels and speakers. So unfortunately, I believe that the government of Fiji, His Excellency Biman Prasad, is not here. So I wish to then welcome Miss Debbie Palmer to the stage. She is Director of Energy, Climate and Environment for the FCDO. And then we have Mr. Alain Beauviard from the Green Climate Fund. We have Mr. Mikko Ollikainen, Head of the Adaptation Fund. We have Dr. Franz Rojas, Director of Water and Sanitation Analysis at CAF. We have Dr. Jonathan Stone, Manager for Climate, Environment and Resilience at the IFRC. And last but not least, I welcome back Acting Director General of GDDI, Helena MacLeod, to the panel as well. Can you still hear me now that I have moved to a different microphone? And let's consider this a fireside chat, a nice conversation amongst colleagues and friends and partners. And as mentioned before, we do welcome questions from the audience as well. So we'll do a round of that in a minute. So please think about which questions you would like to ask the panelists. Maybe we can just start. Should I start maybe with you sitting right next to me, Debbie from FCDO? What comes to mind from your perspective when you imagine the new financing structures needed to fix the challenges with adaptation finance? Yeah, please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much, Ingrid. It's lovely to be with you all this afternoon in the Resilience Hub, which is one of my favourite spots in any COP because it brings such energy and vibrancy and, frankly, authenticity. This is the place where the tough conversations, I think, can and should be happening. So you talked a little bit about some of the tensions in this space. And I do agree, this is a set of structural challenges that we all need to come together, because for me, this is at the heart of how do we drive forward climate action that is needed for the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries to climate change. And so I'm very glad we're talking about the finance and the planning and the finance, because it all needs to come together for me. And so often we're in siloed, separate conversations. I know you had a great session in New York on the NAPs and driving that forward, so I'm going to skirt past that if I may, because I want to get on to some other parts of this question. When we talk about locally led solutions and the tension between that and the scale up, so the UK's been working through a program called Life AR and was one of the first countries to endorse the principles for locally led adaptation, because we really do believe so much of the adaptation drive has got to be driven by communities in local communities and in local areas. And the idea of Life AR is that at least 70% of the climate finance that's being implemented is driven by communities. The communities prioritise what they want to do in terms of interventions. In order to replicate this work and scale it up, which we do need to do, I think we need a couple of things. First of all, we need to be listening to the practitioners on the ground who are learning lessons as they go about how to do this stuff. And we really need to be extracting the good practice that is already emerging. Secondly, of course, we need the finance, and we need to be able to do the scale up. And as we do that, there will be, as you sort of mentioned, certain asset classes, certain types of information, types of intervention, which I think can be bundled and can be scaled. And if I can reach into perhaps a quirky place, but I've spent a lot of time in the last few months with the city of Bristol in the UK, and the work that they are doing to bundle together certain asset classes in order to make them attractive to financiers. Because individually, a single project may not be big enough, but if they can bandy together with other cities, you create an asset class and something that is then investable. So forgive me, it's a slightly quirky example, but I think it proves the point. We need finance, and that's why the UK pushed so hard during COP26 for a collective target to double the collective adaptation finance. And we've just co-authored a report which happily has got some encouraging news that actually we're on track collectively to be able to double our collective adaptation finance. The 2022 data suggests that we're on track to do that, which I think is good. The financing, of course, is not enough. What we need is real-world action. So we're going to need to mobilise new sources of finance, including but not just from the private sector. I'm conscious that in Africa only 3% of adaptation finance comes from institutional investors. But we know that there are huge flows of finance going into infrastructure and going into agriculture already. Large amounts of that is domestic finance. And so the question for me is how we green it, how we help those investors reap the benefits of resilience in order to reduce the risks to those assets as they go forward and hit the climate impacts. And the difficult bit, of course, is that the market is underpricing the risk. So actually, for me at the moment, one of the things that must happen is helping the private sector to price in the true value of climate adaptation. The only way we can do that is if we help the market understand the true risks of climate, of failing to adapt infrastructure and climate. So for me, it's all about developing those system-level solutions to bring together industries and leaders across the finance and investment space. And this is something His Majesty the King in the UK did earlier last week, to bring together financiers and CEOs to actually think about how do we get structural changes in the financial architecture to ensure the risks are better understood and better priced in order to make it worthwhile to invest. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was really comprehensive, and you circled really so many of the points that were mentioned in the scene setting. Let me go to Helena from DDDI. I know that she might have to leave a bit early, so I want to make sure that we get to her. DDDI is, of course, doing a lot in sustainable finance and working on finance mobilization to implementation of NDCs and NAPs and green interventions. So could you share just a bit about the DDDI's track record in leveraging finance and the opportunities that GDDI sees in bringing finance to scale, and are we being successful at it?
Thank you. So I'm really passionate about really bringing things to scale. Like many of us, I've had quite a bit of time in the development sector in the last 25 years, and we see a lot of money coming from ODA, so Overseas Development Assistance, that goes into a project, and it does really good work for that limited project size. And then the funding ends, the time ends, and yes, there are usually some benefits, but they remain fairly small, and there just isn't enough time left to leave it like that. So what we've seen in GDGI that has been really powerful is, for instance, the use of green and different types of bonds. So forest bonds as well, green bonds, sustainable bonds. Now, why are bonds effective? In terms of mobilizing finance, they can inject finance very quickly. So just this year, we supported the Dominican Republic government to issue a $750 million bond. That was with GCF and EU money, and a significant part of that was for water resilience and agriculture resilience. So not just mitigation, but adaptation. Also in Uzbekistan, we worked collectively for $1 billion mobilization. That was just a couple of months ago. Again, a lot of climate smart agriculture. So it actually is scaling some of the demonstration projects that we've done in a sustainable way, providing micro grants to farmers around the very depleted Aral Sea, again to use climate resilient agriculture techniques. So those are just two examples, but this is a ripple that's happening all across the world. So that's one example. Another example, because I wanted to say the whole time, and I just want to say Jesper is a very dear friend of mine, and I want to say thank you for the Resilience Hub as well. But it's special for me to be here because I also get to see Jesper. But it's something else that Debbie has been part of in terms of the FCDO. So with UK money, we have supported Uganda on a climate finance unit. That climate finance unit sits within the Ministry of Finance, and it's there to find finance at scale. So they've just been going about a year, maybe a year and a half, and they've already mobilized $200 million. For a poor country like Uganda, that is a huge amount of money. And that is a significant part of that will be going to adaptation responses. They've got another $450 million in the pipeline. So there is money out there. It's not always easy to access. So what we do is try and take away the really painful bit of accessing money, but also bringing in the private sector wherever possible. So those are examples, and they're there for the taking. I think we just have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. Could we expand with one extra chair for Jesper Hörnberg to join us up on stage as well? I think we need to move the furniture around. Yeah, let's do that. Lovely. Thank you for that. Now, we have heard from a government perspective, FCDO, we have heard from GDDI on the ground and how things work in sort of in a program that is embedded with governments in developing and emerging countries. Maybe let's turn to the climate funds. Let's maybe start with the Adaptation Fund. So Mikko, what do you think about when you reimagine this structure, the new financing structure needed to close this finance gap?
Thank you. Well, before talking about new things, I think the first thing is to make sure that we use the existing structure well. I was listening to the opening remarks by the COP president, and he was saying that public finance for adaptation continues to be crucial, and we need to increase it. The UNEP adaptation gap report is just out. I think may not have been launched, but it's available, and it shows how much the adaptation finance gap has increased since the previous reports. So we need to increase the resources that are available for developing countries, and in adaptation, the most vulnerable often live in situations where private finance is simply not feasible at scale yet. So we need to scale up the use of grant-based resources there as well. The Adaptation Fund, we offer our funding 100% grant-based, and it's very much needed. And it can be very helpful in building the enabling conditions that then in turn make other investment by private sector in different forms possible. So we by providing grant-based financing, we improve the enabling environment, we improve the capacities, we provide opportunities for scaling up. How each country is doing this, scaling up from the existing grant-based resources, that depends on their particular circumstances. We also need to find novel ways of mobilizing finance for adaptation. And the Adaptation Fund, as you may know, we were originally set up, funded from a share of proceeds from the Kyoto Protocol at 2%, which helped us quite a lot in getting started 15 years ago when we started supporting adaptation. And now, under Paris Agreement, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, which is hopefully starting to deliver projects next year, will also be then channeling part of its resources to the Adaptation Fund. 5% of the share proceeds of that Article 6.4 mechanism. So I think that's another sort of innovative way for getting finance for adaptation. Looking at scale, we are also working closely with the other multilateral development funds, multilateral climate funds, sitting next to Alan here, and that is very helpful in helping countries access climate finance for their needs. It's critical to start moving from, to move further from NAP development to NAP implementation. And it's important that we continue refining the estimates of financial needs that developing countries have, so that we can support them in a more programmatic way going forward. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Mikko, for that. And you brought Alain into the conversation a bit as well. So from GCF's perspective, now climate funds are asked to both drive new sources of finance and to collaborate and work together. So how are you working together? How is that working?
Thank you very much for organizing this event and for inviting us. The GCF, as you may know, is actually, as of today, the world's largest multilateral climate finance fund. And we have so far mobilized, we have funded 16 billion so far and mobilized additional 62 billion US dollar. What is important in GCF, as you know, is that at the core of our mandate we have mitigation and adaptation. It's a very balanced portfolio, 50-50. It's very important for us to keep this balance over the time. The other very important point, and I insist on that, is also the geographical balance. 50% of our investment are in least developed countries, in Africa, in seeds. So we are really going where adaptation is a main issue. The other thing which I think is very important to keep in mind is the fact that we are working with over 130 accredited entities. And this is going from the big MDBs that you know, like the World Bank, the EBRD, the African Development Bank, to the UN agencies, but also to the local development bank, the national development bank, which are on the ground, which know exactly what the country needs and how basically you can help the country moving and implementing their NAPs. And this is clearly something which is a differentiation aspect compared to some other funds. I would like to finish on the GCF, reminding also the set of instruments we're using. Of course, we're deploying grants, like the Adaptation Fund, but we're also deploying loans, we're also deploying equity, guarantees, result-based payments. So basically, we can provide the full set of instruments to the countries. Now coming to your question regarding how we work together with the other funds. If you look at the big picture, we have actually an issue of proliferation of climate funds. We have over 80 climate funds around the world at the moment. You can say each of them has a value added, is needed. this could be an answer. The other answer as well from the donor perspective could be, actually we don't have enough resource to pledge everywhere. And as you know, the ODA volume are dropping at the moment. And this is very worrying. So many donors are coming back to us saying we have to pick and choose now. When we talk to France, when we talk to UK, to Germany, let's see what the US will say. So there will be a question about the rationalization of this architecture and basically how we are working better together. There have been like a recently published report at G20 level. I think many of you may have seen that, about the vertical climate and environment funds, which gives some options to move forward. So we are looking at them, I think the adaptation as well. But to be very concrete, what are we trying to do now? First, we are trying to work on the harmonization of the process. Good example is the accreditation process. Basically, we have a lot of room for improvement. Another way that we're exploring is like sharing data on projects. There is a common platform which is like called Project Explorer, where basically we put the data of the project together to share actually the best practice on the different projects we are financing. A good example that we could pick also, and actually is coming from the MDBs, is what they are doing with the GEMS database. They are sharing basically the risk assessment of the different country and different projects. And this is something that could be also interesting for the climate funds. A third thing that I think we could work on are the country platforms. And here this is the way to coordinate the effort at country level and to see basically if a country wants to move forward on the NAPs, how basically the different players, the different climate funds, the different MDBs, the national bank, can come together to finance basically the implementation of the project. And I think the last point, which is quite important, and we are pushing a lot on that, is the readiness program. You mentioned that in your introduction. The GCF has an envelope of $500 million US. I think this is the largest at the moment among all the funds. And we're happy basically to support the country and the other players to basically strengthen the capacity building, because we know this is the bottleneck. It's not only about the money for the project finance, but it's mostly about the capacity building and preparing the project and building a pipeline in the long term. So this will be the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain, for that. Now let's stay a bit more with kind of at the fund level. So I'll ask my next question to Dr. Rojas. Before we go back to sort of more on the ground work with the IFRC and later we'll chat with the Resilience Hub. But so Dr. Rojas, from the CAF perspective, how do you collaborate? Like, what resonates in what was said by Alain now in terms of sharing of data and finding ways to collaborate with others? What is that infrastructure that you think could close the finance gap from your perspective?
Thank you, Ingvild, for this invitation, and thanks to GGGI for the invitation. I think before going to innovative mechanisms and how to work together, I would like to stress on the importance of adaptation for Latin America. Let me give you some examples. In Latin America, floods have doubled in the last 20 years compared to the previous 20 years, and they are more intense. The latest huge event was in Rio Grande do Sul this year, in April, in the southern region of Brazil, that cost 150 deaths, nearly 600,000 displaced, and 2 million homeless. That's only an example of what happened this year. And in 2023, in the opposite, droughts were also affecting the region. In Montevideo, Uruguay, where I live, we faced a severe drought that put in danger the normal provision of water supply for the whole country, and specifically for Montevideo. We received brackish water because the water utility had to combine water from the traditional freshwater source with Rio La Plata River that is estuary. So they had to combine, and we received brackish water. So people or population had to buy bottled waters for drinking or for cooking, for instance. And that was just a couple of examples. And of course, this year we have faced strong wildfires in at least 6 countries. Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Paraguay, and Argentina, with thousands of hectares burned. So damages and impacts are increasing, which show us more complex scenarios. That's why I think it's very important to work on adaptation and to increase finance, as you said. Then at CAF, we have committed green financing increase from 24% in 2020 to 40% in 2026, and to allocate around 25 billion over the next 5 years. And as part of that, because I work for the Water and Sanitation Division, we have committed an approval of 4 billion during 2023-2026. So it means 1 billion per year on average, and it represents an increase of 65% of our annual average we had in the past. So that said, we have diversified also different instruments that could be interesting. For instance, on the sovereign loans, we have been working now on what we call P4R, Program for Results, that it's more to strengthen government programs, like could be the NAPs, for instance, and disbursements are made upon targets achievements. And I think it's very interesting instrument, especially for some countries that they have the possibility to finance by themselves, but they need some leverage and also to provide some technical capacity, for instance, from Chile or Norway and other OECD countries in Latin America. From the non-sovereign loans, we have been also working to subnational governments and public enterprises, and it means that guarantees, because they are non-sovereigns, are provided by the subnational governments or the public companies based on their expected revenues. So it's a way to reduce the pressure on fiscal measures in the nation, but going to the water utilities or the water companies, and of course the opportunity to increase financing. And we have been working in preparation to some water supply and sanitation under this modality. But let me give you an example that we are very proud, because we have concluded a DS operation just a couple of months ago, and it's referred to guarantees and insurances for debt for nature for fresh water. In the past, we have seen debt for nature for oceans or for coastal and marine protection, but not for fresh water. And El Salvador has completed this year, a couple of months ago, the world's largest debt conversion of $1 billion US dollars that will generate savings for around 300 billion in lifetime savings to apply over time to support conservation, water security, and ecosystem restoration in the Lempa River Basin. And this was a combination of a lender that was for the loan, DFC, the Development Finance Corporation of US, provided a political risk insurance, and CAF provided a standby letter of credit. And the combination of these instruments, the risk insurance and this guarantee or standby letter of credit, provided a credit enhancement to support this transaction. That's why the savings of the 300 million that is going to be destined to water conservation and to enhance water quality, quantity, to strengthen climate resilience and protect the watersheds. So I think, as I said, it's the first time we are working on a debt for nature for fresh water, and I think it's an opportunity to continue working in different countries under this modality. Another instrument that is quite common, and it could be working with the climate funds, is the blended finance, as we call the blended finance, which MDBs or climate funds provide development finance. We could mention development finance as referring to concessional loans to attract or to leverage non-concessional loans coming from public development banks or for commercial banks, for instance. And we have a couple of operations that we have been working with wastewater treatment plants with some commercial banks also, and also with some concessionaires in a way of PPP, for instance, in Montevideo with the Arasati projects. And finally, we understand that there's also an opportunity to provide corporate loans to private investors in innovative ways, like the so-called sustainability-linked loans, that it offers the possibility to reduce the interest rates upon completion of agreed targets. That's quite interesting because it's an incentive. If they complied some targets, then we can reduce the interest rate, and it's interesting. And of course, we are also keen to support enterprises and some companies the issuance of thematic bonds like green bonds, blue bonds, and others, because actually at CAF we have issued many thematic bonds and we know how to do it. So that's how we can support also the clients to issue thematic bonds. Thank you. I stop for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rojas, for that. And what strikes me from what everyone has said is that there are no shortage of ideas and actual solutions that have been tried and tested. But maybe among you, the one who has most eyes and ears on the ground in terms of understanding how things are implemented and whether it reaches people in this state of polycrisis that we are right now would be the IFRC, Jonathan. If you could share your reflections on, despite ideas and solutions and also successful work that is happening, how do you see it from your perspective in terms of addressing loss and damage and adaptation and the things that you are working on?
Thank you very much. And for those of you who maybe don't know, we represent 191 different Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies around the world who are auxiliaries to their government. And in each of your countries, the Red Cross or Red Crescent will be something slightly different. And that's part of the kind of the beauty of our network. Have 16.5 million volunteers, hundreds of thousands of local branches, and we work in communities before, during, after emergencies. We are one of the world's largest humanitarian organizations. However, increasingly we see that we're not just the last mile partner, but that as auxiliaries to government, we're getting much more involved further up the stream. So talking a lot more about adaptation, NAPs, etc. One thing that we like to do at the moment, quite often when we're designing a new program, is get a chair and we put a piece of paper on it and it says Amina. And Amina is a female-headed household. Well, she's a single mother who has 4 kids and lives somewhere where climate finance doesn't often reach. And why I think that's important is because as much as we might try and represent the views of others, we like to try and have this reality check. So rather than maybe looking at me, you can imagine there's a chair with Amina's with Amina set in it. And maybe a few things that I might reflect on in terms of the fantastic progress we're seeing. And we are seeing progress. You hear of all these amazing ideas. The first thing, to quote a friend of mine, we're spending money where we can, not where we should. So where we should is with people like Amina. Where we can is where our current delivery channels reach. We have pipes, some of them a bit leaky. The pipes are heading to certain places, maybe not the others. And, in the past, we were mobilizing a lot, but not delivering a lot. And an awful lot of that's changing. And I really liked what you said, Debbie, about the bundling. I think this is so important because, what we can do as a secretariat, what the funds can do is you can bundle things and then divide it up. But there we run into maybe our first big problem, I think. And that's around risk management. And I don't know about you all, but my sense is sometimes we're managing the wrong risks. So those of you here or listening, if you're from an organization that maybe gets you to put a receipt in when you get a taxi or for buying a drink, do we do those same things with communities? Or maybe some of us are here on a DSA, and maybe we get a DSA, but when our communities want to implement locally led adaptation, the people who we're working with, do we expect the same financial controls? So I wonder for us all, is our risk appetite in the right place? Can we have a bit of a reality check? Because if we want locally led action, which I think we all agree is one of the key ways forward, this will require a slightly different approach to risk. Yes, bundling at the center, small amounts of money locally, and what locally led really means is communities themselves designing programs, managing the budgets, seeing the implementation. Now, if we don't want to let them do that without having to necessarily receipt it, I'm being overly simplifying it, then we really need to think about our risk appetite. So that's the kind of first thing. Are we managing the wrong risks? And I think that's really great to see on the big picture, like the readiness bit of GCF. This is a real move to try and do that, and we're certainly doing that a lot in our organisation. We do an awful lot of these grounded community participatory projects. We get to the end of it, and then we're giving matched grants to communities to spend based on those priorities that they've identified. And so we're really starting to see and push for locally led as the default. The reason why I say default is because it's not the only solution. And so if we go and speak to someone like Amina, yes, Amina and her community want to decide on what interventions they need to solve and kind of tackle the climate crisis. And indeed, locally led is infinitely preferable to experts who often look a bit like me, going to places like that and giving solutions. Clearly, we need to empower local communities who know the own change that they need. But Amina also knows that services are critically important because it shouldn't just be on the community. So it's great to see some partners that we're working with here, like the Climate Resilience Centre, ICLE in the room. We're starting to work a lot more with cities, kind of further up the stream, because we know that the solution can't be one organisation, even as big as ours, going to each community, delivering these solutions. And then the final thing really I'd like to say, it's interesting around the fund and the funding and the proliferation of funds. We at the moment internally are creating a fund. It's not a fund that we're advertising externally though. What I mean by this fund is we are finding a way to radically transform our own internal financial architecture such that we can take money on a yearly basis, but to our national societies and our partners, we can give them long-term predictable financing. So I think we have to be honest, there has to be a way to manage annual budgets and give confidence to implementing partners to keep delivering for a long time. We had a great discussion with a donor that I won't name, where we said to them, we'd love 10-year programs from you. And they said, yeah, 10-year programs, we have annual budgets. And so this really is a way that we hope to reconcile it. So yeah, thanks so much for inviting us here. I think the change is incredibly possible. When you see locally led, it's incredible. I'm sure many of you have seen this. When you see it connected with services like shock responsive social protection, wow, we really can make a difference. But yeah, let's have a bit of that reality check, mostly around risks and what we're managing. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. That brought it home, I think, quite a bit in terms of especially maybe this friction, tension within adaptation itself between the local and these mechanisms that are global, that enable the finance to reach where it's needed. And you have your internal structure that you talk about here for how to make that happen and how to be a reliable long-term partner for communities and organizations on the ground. So maybe along that line, if I may turn to you, Jesper, from the Resilience Hub, and I think you as a hub, you see organizations probably grappling with that tension a bit. So yeah, so what are you seeing and hearing, and what are your perspectives?
Well, thank you very much. It's brilliant, and thank you, Jonathan. You took a lot of my speaking points. At least I can pretend you did, so that I don't have to sound as smart. Can you all hear me? I just need to do a mic check, because my noise... Whoa. Okay, I'm going to do that. It's okay? Okay, I'm going to just take these off. I'll do this blind. The Resilience Hub is more than just Global Resilience Partnership. I have my colleague there, Jorge, from the Atlantic Council. He opened this morning. And let me just start by saying welcome. It's lovely that you are here. This is a very important platform, we think, where we can bring conversations like this together. It's a much more human interaction than what you find elsewhere. Now then on to Global Resilience Partnership a bit. We're 10 years old. We work with surfacing new innovation from the ground, adaptation and resilience. We support them through mentoring, financing, networking, additional financing. We're involved obviously in the Resilience Hub, which is a platform where everyone can meet and discuss. And then we also have a strong foundation in knowledge. So a lot of science. We're hosted at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So that gives us that platform. The work we've done over the years in terms of finding new innovation on the ground, very much locally led, I think that's absolutely critical, I mean, a couple of things come up, and it's interesting, and I'm a bit inspired by the distinguished panel here. So I'm going to try not to repeat anything. I agree with what they said, but I'll say some new stuff, I think, and a few new things. I think step one is you have to be respectful of reality, because we're in deep shit. Excuse my bad language. But there is no way I can underline enough. If we don't do something now, we're stuffed. Not just the global south, but the global north. And maybe that gets the attention from some more players in the global north. I think we need to build capacity. We talk about absorption capacity. How many in the room know what blended finance is? Show of hands. So that's pretty decent. Out there, when you actually work on projects, blended finance is a foreign concept. So it's about building capacity. Absorption capacity is about how do you actually implement. It needs to happen on all levels, governmental, down to project, down to how do you do project financing. My background is in finance and also in entrepreneurship, so where we met. And I just know how much I was grappling with all this terminology. I didn't know what I was needing to prove, and I'm pretty sure that the people I needed to convince didn't know what I was going to convince them of either. It's complex, so you need to build, especially if you want to do it locally led, you really need to invest a lot in that capacity. I think locally led is important also for equity reasons. Equity, for reasons I don't need to repeat, very important, but also the people on the ground and the people in the local ministries and so on, they know much more what the problem is. So you need to be conscious of that, and it's as Jonathan was saying, it's much better if they do it than if someone like me comes down, not really understanding what I'm doing, being parachuted in, and even if I live in a country 10 years, I'm not going to have the same understanding anyway. You need to have a systems thinking approach to it. You need to take all different things into consideration, which makes it a lot more complicated, but I think also the only way we can make it work, because otherwise we're doing pilots, and we've done that for quite some time, and it doesn't really work. We need to increase funding. Absorption capacity, yes, but you also need to increase funding. The Marshall Plan was a lot of money. We're not putting enough money into what we need to do now, and it's about the Marshall Plan, really, that needs to sort of come into place. You need to also invest where it's relevant to invest. I think that point has been raised, but I think it's a very important one. We need to be more inclusive in how we do stuff. And I know I'm listing a menu of things here that makes it impossible, you think, but it's not. It has to happen like this. And inclusivity is not something you fix and then it's done and then you have an approach. It's something you wake up to every day and then you do it again. It's like democracy. If we don't focus on it, it's going to go away. It is fragile. We need to have structures. We talked about risk and cost of capital and so on. Very often I've seen how these models, you sort of as a funder, and I'm an ex-funder, Swedish government, you want to create and de-risk and become agile at your end, not at the ground, not on the ground. So you need to think through, again, coming back to systems thinking, you need to think through how can we make it more agile on the ground and make it work like that. Inclusivity. We need to allow ourselves to learn from failure. So what doesn't work, let's look at it and figure out what didn't work instead of focusing on what did work. I think there are some lessons to be learned if you go back and look at how, say, I'm going to use Sweden as an example. When Sweden got electricity set up, how was that done? Similar models have worked in other countries. Yeah, I just saw that someone pointed at the watch, so I'm gonna stop there. No? Okay, I have one more point. And this is really close to my heart. If we don't think that a model or a thing that we try will work in, again, let's say Sweden, why do we expect it to work in, say, Kenya? With less funding, with less experience, with less absorption capacity, and all those things. Why? Less infrastructure on financial structures and so on. Why do we think it will work in another country? And I think if we look at that honestly, accept what hasn't worked and try to fix it instead of casting blame, we have a chance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesper, and I was enjoying that. I was looking at the time for different reasons, so that was really great. And it's the peg and the square I think you are pointing at in terms of the solutions are local and they must be local and they must be found locally. So the flexibility needs to come from those global mechanisms in place to channel funding to where the solutions are. I think that's what I'm picking up from Jesper. And We are stuffed and we are in it deep, right? That is the message. And I'm looking at the audience because I am wondering who in the audience would like to come in now with your questions or comments. Many hands, I love it. So I'll hand my microphone, shall I start here?
Thank you so much. My name is Amália Souza. I'm from Brazil. I'm the founder of a local fund 20 years ago that actually was set up to do what you're talking about. We've been making grants. I can't see everybody because I'm too short. For 20 years, all over South America. And then we help to set up other funds in other countries. And we are specifically designed, so no reference to conventional vertical structures of philanthropy. We are players. We belong to the systems that we are funding. We've developed a very sophisticated system, and we've proven along the years. We've made over 4,000 grants. We make about 500 grants a year. I don't know, can you still hear? Because it's disappeared here. And we actually created a number of things. So Brazil has a network of funds like ours with great absorption capacity, although we are looked at as if we don't have the capacity. But we have funds like ours, all dedicated to putting money on the ground in all levels for all of the communities, IPLC, ADF, all of these terms that you use, in scale. So we are designed to scale. So we created a local network. It's called the Comoa Network, Social Justice Philanthropy. So sorry that I was so quick when you said about local banks, development banks. No, they don't. They cannot reach, or communities cannot reach them. That's why we set up systems that are designed to help complicated funds get to communities in a scalable solution. So in Brazil, we have this network, but we also co-founded something called the Socio-Environmental Funds of the Global South Alliance. We're made up of, so far, not even 3 years, but already 15 members, funding in 50 countries of the Global South, all designed, all with a similar system to make resources get directly to the hands of the communities that can make the biggest difference. So I just want to make sure you know that there's infrastructure there, there's absorption capacity, and what I keep seeing in spaces, many spaces, is that we are completely invisible to systems like yours, and we are. It's so invisible that I keep hearing that people have to come from the north to build capacity in our countries, which, of course, no. If you are so far away, if you don't belong, if you like what you just said, you don't understand how sophisticated our systems are. So there is capacity, and we've been trying collectively to to see how to influence this, how to make sure that we download resources directly in the hands. And I only talked about local funds, but there are many of our countries that have very sophisticated structures as well of implementing solutions as well. So it's not just funding the communities, but working with communities. So I don't know how to make it more clear, but there's a lot of infrastructure, and it would be really good that we talked a lot more about this.
Thank you so much, Maria Amelia Souza. Just to get your name, because I thought that was excellent, and that brought in that layer of infrastructure at the national and local levels, which you should have been on the stage. So I'm very glad you had the chance to speak here. And I'll take one more before I hand it back.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Nikita Pandey from Carbon Pulse Press. So I heard you, Nico, talking about there's an issue that there's a proliferation of climate funds. And I just wanted to know more about it. I mean, what the donors are doing then. I mean, do we have a case of too many cooks, or what do you suggest basically?
I see more questions are in the audience, but let's take these two first, and then we'll hopefully have time for one more round. And I think there was one very directly to you, Mikko. So should we start with you? And you can respond to both. I would also like to hear from GCF, because I think there was some eye contact made between Ms. Sosa and you. So please, Mikko first.
Thank you very much for both the really good interventions, and I also would be happy to discuss with Maria afterwards, because the model seems to work very well with how the Adaptation Fund works as well. So on the funds, I guess my comment was that there is a good number of existing channels already, and we should make sure that these channels are used efficiently and effectively. And part of that is our collaboration with the other climate funds that also Alan was talking about. I think the benefit is that we have quite a good selection of different tools, different instruments that we can deploy. Also quite a lot of experience of working with national organizations, both the Adaptation Fund and now the Green Climate Fund. We employ direct access, making funding available directly to countries' own organizations. And in the case of the Adaptation Fund, for almost 15 years we've been working on local-led adaptation, also through direct access entities. So our experiences of local-led adaptation are very good. It is a way actually to do two things at the same time. One of them is providing the support that those vulnerable communities need, but at the same time also doing readiness, because it builds capacity in itself to work with these organizations, and very much learning from them, not only bringing them capacity from the outside, but also from learning from them. And in fact, with the GCF, we have quite an active, it's called the Community of Practice of Direct Access Entities that covers all the Adaptation Fund and GCF direct access entities that meet regularly to share lessons learned in a pure South-South manner, which is the way it should be. And it's been inspiring to see how these national organizations from very different parts of the world, when they come to see each other's projects firsthand, there are very vibrant exchanges on this is how you did it, this is how we also could do it in our country. And it's in a way much more powerful than having a consultant from the global north come and pass that message, because then it's really lived and experienced by those organizations in the south. Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead from GCF.
Thank you very much. I cannot agree more with you, because the thing is, if you look back like 10, 20 years ago, I mean, most of these funds, they were working mostly with the big players, international players, like the World Bank, the EBRD, African Development, the UN agencies. And I think the GCF was one of the first funds, and the Adaptation Fund as well, to try to go more locally. And obviously, as of today, we don't have the full coverage. This is obvious. But if you look at the number of accredited partners we are working with, it's increasing quite fast. So we've been working to 130. We want to double that in the next 3 years. And obviously, like partners like yours could be like very good partners to work with. So this is coming on the radar. I just want to tell you that the trend is going this way. So it's going from the very global players down to more and more local players, and we see that every day. I don't say it's easy to do, especially with the accreditation process, which is still one of the big issues that we have at the GCF, and we know that very well. As you know, our new executive director is trying to simplify that. This is one of the priorities, in order basically to reach more to the local community. So this is one of the priorities, and basically GCF is going this way. The other question was about this proliferation of funds. I think on this one, this is probably one of the key questions for the donors. I'm looking to my UK neighbors. There is a big discussion going about the international financial architecture and how to make it more effective, more impactful, and so on and so forth. We don't have the silver bullet at the moment. We know there is a work ongoing at MDB level. Now there is a work ongoing at vertical climate funds level. The key question is basically when you have so many funds, and actually every new COP is bringing new funds in the game. At one point of time, how the donors can reply to the request of pledging in these different funds. And one of the answer could be, and then I'll let you bring your answer, could be to bring also new resources on the table. I mean, we, for example, are now engaging in task force of the global solidarity levies about new taxation scheme. Could be on aviation, could be on financial transaction, could be on the shipping industry. So there are different streams that could be investigated because we believe we need to find some new fundings for these different funds.
Yes, and I think you brought in Debbie now from FCDO, so I'll hand it to you to respond as well. Debbie, please go ahead.
Super, thank you. So I suppose my answer to the question of whether there are too many funds is really twofold. So the first is that we have all collectively worked over the last 15 years to create a circumstance where there are many, many funds. And they are working in different geographies, they're working at different parts of the system at the very top and then aggregating down. And all of these organizations and funds all have really important roles to play. Are there too many of them? My answer is yes. The system is too complicated. The transaction costs are too high. So whilst I don't take aim at any individual player who is doing their best in their local circumstances, trying to get the best effectiveness and efficiency, together we have created a situation where the system is too complicated, it's too expensive in terms of the transaction costs of running it, and we need it to be simpler, we need it to be more efficient, we need it to be more effective, and the most important thing is we need it to be easier to use for the end user. The system needs to be designed around the countries that are trying to draw down the money. And so some of the things that the panel has talked about in terms of sharing risk assessments or sharing accreditation processes, those are great innovations. That's exactly what we need to reduce the transaction costs and to make it easier for countries to draw down on the money, frankly. So I agree with you, we need more money from all sources, and that's the task of this COP, right? Through the NCQG is how do we get more money on the table from all sources, but we also need the money to be easier to access, and we need it to be as efficient as possible so we're not wasting money on layers and layers of transaction. We need it to flow right down as quickly as possible. And that, for me, is the task of the years ahead of us, is how do we use the long-term vision where the multilateral climate funds are coming together and trying to share processes, just like the MDBs are doing through the GEMS database, etc., and we've seen them do in the past. But also, how do we ensure the system is being right-sized and made as efficient as possible for the funds to flow? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we are talking. We are getting to some interesting things. And I know there are more questions from the audience. I would like to hand it to the gentleman in the back. I think you can take my microphone.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be in such an august company. I was a banker once in 2008. And my question is kind of layered, and it speaks to a lot of things that I've heard from particularly Jonathan and Jesper, which is we have enough money going around the world for funding wars and all sorts of things, which is obviously detrimental, but we don't have enough money for climate finance. I love the idea of layering and structuring, but having been in Wall Street at a time where we are structuring very complex products which we didn't understand, you know exactly where that led us. And that's exactly, I feel, what we're doing is we're creating a set of layered products and complexity, which I don't think we fully fathom as a group, as a community. Risk should be taken by those who most understand it. And a lot of the financial instruments and a lot of the conversation today, as I've heard before, is about transferring that risk, de-risking from the sources for those who have, and transferring risk to the communities that don't have. I work for a grassroots organization called Practical Action, We work across communities, not as many as big as Jonathan said, but we've been working with the grassroots communities for about 60, 65 years. And while we work on locally led stuff, it's the communities which actually face the brunt of our inaction more than anything else. And as we are figuring out the financial mechanisms, if truth be told, somebody's dying out there in the communities. So I'm not sure whether, and it may sound like it's very dystopian, but the pace at which we are progressing this entire climate finance conversation doesn't seem to be urgent enough. While we're taking a lot of time, I'm challenging the intentionality of all of us as a community, a key component of impact finance. If you're not going to have intention, then I'm not sure what deliberations are we doing. So I'm challenging right from structuring the products to its efficacy, to complexity, and it's great. I've enjoyed structuring complexity as well once upon a time. But I don't think we enjoy those luxuries in these times where people in countries, particularly where we work in Bangladesh and Philippines, are facing the brunt of what they have not perpetuated and created. The communities that we work with, for instance, Bangladesh has spent 40 years trying to get out of poverty, and then they are one of the countries which gets most affected by the impacts of actions and inactions of those. So the question for all of us as a communities, I love I do understand it's much more nuanced, it's simple, but I'm not sure whether the sense of urgency, and I believe that instead of making it simple, and I'm going to quote Schumacher here, that any intelligent fool can make it more complex. So I'm going to quote our founder Schumacher to say that I think we're making it much more complex than it needs to be. And there should be some of us who should be thinking that, is there a simpler mechanism to get access to finance and everything that comes with it to the communities, because I think that's where money needs to flow. So just leaving you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you mind saying your name? I don't know if...
My name is Oyun Banerjee. I work with an organization. I'm the Asia Director for Practical Action.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for that interventions. And I think what you are saying is there are solutions and there are problems. And what is this stuff in the middle that needs to be...
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think we spend 80% of our time discussing problems. Your slide was amazing. But I think we should spend 80% of time designing alternative solutions, and we don't do enough of solutioning. If at any point in time I ask that what are the set of solutions, case studies which can be replicated, I don't think there's a compendium that we've generated as a community. There are not, these conversations are still in bits and pieces. So if we want a systems change, systemic impact, then we need to have those case examples. And I love the example that what's not worked in Sweden, why would we expect it to work in Kenya, which has many more complexities layered to it. So I think we're spending a lot of time explaining why things don't work, rather than spending time figuring out how things can work.
Thanks for that. We have a comment here also from Dr. Shin.
Yes, it's like a comment and also very kind request, especially for GCF and also FSTDO. Very good discussion today. And this is my following discussion with UNOSD and the World Economic Forum and ITU at an international organization. Very interesting is that they're looking for like a final stage of project development. Well, project development means we need to ensure a project must be ready for investment through a project development using grant resources and then financing match. So in that context, we are better positioned. We can very happy to share our portfolio, different sector, and a lot of country team working with our HQ expertise. So FSTDO and the GCF mentioning about resources, maybe can help access to strengthen your strong visibility and then strong attention from potential donor countries, more access to financing. And then our colleague from NGO, right? So absolutely, we are also very thinking about how to finish the project development in the better scale. Usually, grant resource for project development capacity building is not really important. The important thing is the early stage of project development. We must pay attention to three things. First, strong ownership from the government. Second one is the project component must be well accepted by financiers. Otherwise, spend 2 years later, I'm sorry, financing is not missing. Last point is that this kind of project development very well accepted by all the stakeholders. So I'm very happy to share this kind of portfolio, our lessons learned. So maybe I can continue discussing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shin from GDDI. Yes, I think the one who is jumping out of his seat here now is Jonathan.
Sorry to be excited to come back in. I feel like the fireside chatters, had a douse of gasoline or something from the questions in the audience. So it's great to see organizations like Practical Action, and for the record, we program with you in places where we can't reach. So I mean, it's very important to do stuff in partnership. I see Ground Truth Solutions here as well. I had a bit of a minor epiphany the other day. I was in Geneva, where we're headquartered, and Switzerland is so proud to have the Red Cross headquartered there that they put our emblems on their buses every now and then when we have our big events, right? So I sat there and I saw it and I thought, this is wonderful. How amazing. The city recognizes us, the country recognizes us. It's wonderful. I went into work and then I looked at some of the to-do list and I looked at some of the things for some accreditation, to some funding, to some various different things. And I thought, oh, okay, interesting. The country we're hosted in, which is a global financial center, trusts us enough to have our emblems on buses. This feels a little bit at odds with some of the accreditation processes for various different bits of funds. I'm trying not to look at anyone in the room. And I think this says an important point. There's like a dissonance in our minds sometimes between who and what we trust and what we want to do, and then the systems and processes that we go to. So again, just kind of coming back to this idea around, are we managing the right risks? I do not doubt we are managing a risk with some elements of due diligence, accreditation, access, and we've got so many. Are we managing the right risk? And I think coming back to the urgency, the risk I think we want to manage is if we're too slow, there won't be many more people around to benefit from our funding, right? That's unfortunately the task. That just people like Amina won't be around anymore. And the final thing to say is we're really seeing, especially we definitely can't do it on our own, and not just in the global south. In the US, for example, recently with some hurricanes, the American Red Cross is funding small, medium enterprises. So people who have cold chain solutions, people who are able to evacuate disabled or other kind of vulnerable people from the path of hurricanes. So we don't all need to do it kind of on our own. But yeah, just coming back to that, are we managing the right risks? I'm not convinced. Maybe initiatives such as due diligence passporting is a really good one. Common frameworks, tiered due diligence. If you trust one big organization, can you then help them own the risk for the others? I think the solutions are there if we have that urgency.
Thank you very much for that. Now, we are actually approaching the end of our time here, but just to not conclude, because I think it's impossible to conclude such a rich conversation. But there are, if I can have Dr. Rojas and Jesper come in with your 1 minute to-do list that you now have made from listening to this conversation today. Then we've had all the panelists speak twice today, so an equal opportunity panel. Should we start with you, Dr. Rojas?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's quite important that we have seen the urgency to action. That it was in the previous session, and this also came. So I think the finance is there, as you said, but I think we should also focus on the enabling environment. Sometimes the enabling environment is a constraint. And sometimes when we are planning to finance, for instance, and some people were claiming of the delays and others, CAF I think, is very fast compared to other development banks. From request to approval, we take around 4 to 6 months. That's quite fast. But sometimes we have faced that there are no projects. I mean, there are no final designs. There are no action plans to empower. So how can we move forward and how could we move faster if we don't have the pre-investment, for instance? And we have seen that countries and nations and others don't want or are not so incentivized to invest in pre-investment programs. So I think it's one of the key issues as part of the enabling environments. Institutions and others are quite important, policies, institutions and others, but also the investment program. That's why we have developed 2 facilities at CAF with grants to promote final designs with non-reimbursable resources, also for adaptation, but also for water security, for instance. But we know that our facilities are minor compared to the challenge. But I think it would be part of the strategies to promote and to accelerate investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, appropriately, because we're in your house here at the Resilience Hub. Jasper, please go ahead.
Right, let me take this to a philosophical level maybe then instead, because yeah, difficult to process that much what I think we actually need to do. But I think we need to, it's urgent, right? But we need to stop and reflect as well and actually think through how it is we do stuff, learn from failure, stop stigmatizing failure, learn from it instead. From the startup community where I've spent quite a bit of time, failure of a startup is actually almost a badge of honor, because then you can move on and you learn so much from failure. It's like any PhD in anything. You have to go through reality. So stop, reflect, work together. The only way we can do this is by working together. Yes, maybe it's too complex. I totally agree. It is too complex. So let's stop and think about, okay, how do we do it instead? And think through that process instead of just launching into something new. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesper, for that very good, actually a very nice way, I think, of summarizing the spirit of this conversation. So it isn't the last time we meet, I am sure, and I hope that we have been able to highlight some of the challenges, but also importantly, some of the solutions. At least we have the toolbox and we know the tools that could be deployed, and we know what the challenge, what the risks are, and what the communities are experiencing from climate change. So how do we match those two? And we are certainly planning to meet again. We hope to have a conversation with the Dutch government in the new year to continue this conversation and this collaboration and partnership. So I want to thank you all very much for the very rich conversation and for being here. I also wish to thank very much the audience. And let's take a photo. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.